The air in the house was thick, not with the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon, but with the cloying weight of unspoken words. It was Christmas Day, and the usual festive cheer was a ghost in the room. I sat in my favorite armchair, a mug of cold coffee in my hand, staring at the twinkling lights on the tree. They felt like a mockery of the darkness in my heart. I'm 52, and my name is Mark. I've built a good life for myself and my family, or so I thought. My wife Sarah was in the kitchen, her movements tense and deliberate as she prepared the ham, the clatter of the pans a sharp contrast to the silence that had fallen over us. My daughter Emily was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. At 23, she was a spitting image of her mother, but today, her features were set in a hardened mask I barely recognized. The silence was a character in the room, pressing down on us all. It had started the moment my mother, Clara, had left for her retirement community a month ago. A fall in the kitchen had made it clear she couldn't live alone anymore. The move was a difficult decision, fraught with guilt and sadness. My mother, a woman of stubborn grace and quiet strength, had insisted she was fine, but the doctor's words had been a hammer blow. She needs constant supervision, Mark. Her cognitive decline is accelerating. We'd found a beautiful place for her, a community with nurses on staff and daily activities. It was a good solution, or so I had tried to convince myself, but for Emily it was a problem, a hurdle on her path to what she saw as her rightful inheritance. My mother had a decent amount of money saved, a nest egg she'd built from her late husband's pension and her own careful frugality. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference. Enough to pay off Emily's student loans. She had often lamented to me, or to put a down payment on a house, a dream she'd been chasing with an almost desperate intensity. The cost of my mother's care was substantial, and Emily saw every dollar spent on her as a dollar lost to her own future. I tried to explain the reality of the situation, the cost of round-the-clock care, the necessity of the move. I told her that my mother's health and happiness were more important than any inheritance. But my words were a foreign language to her. She saw it all through a prism of resentment and entitlement. The tension had been building for weeks, a slow-burning fuse that was about to reach its end. The fuse was lit by the sound of a key in the front door. My older brother David walked in, followed by his wife Lisa and their 2 teenage boys. David, a successful lawyer, had always been the golden child, the one who did everything right. He and I were close, but there had always been an undercurrent of competition, a silent tally of who had achieved more, who had lived up to our father's expectations. David was always the winner. He was also the one who had stayed relatively uninvolved in my mother's care, offering moral support from a distance while I shouldered the responsibility. I didn't blame him. He had his own family, his own life. But the weight of it all fell on me, and it was a heavy burden to bear. "Merry Christmas, Mark," David said, his voice cheerful, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing in the room. "Smells great in here, Sarah." We exchanged hugs, the forced smiles on our faces, a shared secret. Emily barely looked up from her phone. Lisa, a woman who prided herself on being a pillar of calm, gave me a sympathetic glance. She knew. David was too wrapped up in his own world to notice, but Lisa was observant. She saw the lines of worry etched deeper on my face, the strained smile on Sarah's lips, and the cold indifference in Emily's posture. Dinner was a quiet affair. The usual boisterous conversation was replaced by polite small talk and long pauses. The boys, sensing the tension, kept their heads down, focused on their plates. Emily picked at her food, her eyes darting between me and the ham on her plate. It was as if she were weighing the cost of each bite. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for presents. This was always my favorite part of Christmas, the joy of giving, the excitement of seeing my family's faces light up. But this year, it felt hollow. Emily opened a few presents, her gratitude a perfunctory whisper. The last gift was a small square box from me and Sarah. Emily tore off the paper to reveal a velvet jewelry box. Inside was a silver locket, an antique from my grandmother. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice devoid of any real emotion. She held it in her palm, turning it over and over. "It was your great-grandmother's," I said, trying to infuse some warmth into the moment. I thought you'd like it." Emily looked up, and for the first time all day her eyes met mine. But there was no warmth in them, only a cold, calculating fire. "It's nice," she said, her voice low and cutting. "But you know what would have been really nice, Dad? A check. A down payment on a house, or just the money for my student loans." A gasp from Sarah broke the silence. David's eyes widened in shock, and Lisa looked mortified. I felt a hot wave of anger and shame rush through me. The boys shifted uncomfortably on the couch, suddenly very interested in their phones. "Emily, that is enough," Sarah said, her voice a sharp warning. "No, it's not enough," Emily said, her voice rising. "It's not enough that we're watching Grandma's money get eaten up by that place. It's not fair. She should be here with us, and we should be getting her money when she's gone." My jaw tightened. I felt a tremor run through me, a mix of fury and disbelief. I looked at my daughter, the little girl I had once held in my arms, and I saw a stranger. "Emily, what are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked me straight in the eye, and the words that came out of her mouth were a poison-tipped arrow aimed directly at my heart. "I'm saying you could die, Dad, so we can get Grandma's inheritance." The words hung in the air, a grotesque echo of everything I had feared. The room was silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had just wished for my death. The irony was a cruel joke. I had dedicated my life to her, to our family, to providing a life better than the one I had. And in a moment of selfish entitlement, she had wished me dead. My mind raced, the words a fire in my brain. The hurt was a physical ache in my chest. I looked at Sarah, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. David, stunned into silence, looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. My hands, which had been gripping the armrests, unclenched. I stood up, the movement slow and deliberate. Everyone in the room looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. The calmness I felt was a cold, hard shield. "Emily," I said, my voice steady, "do you hear what you just said?" She looked away, her face flushing with a mix of defiance and embarrassment. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I said. "You meant exactly that. You meant that the money is more important than my life, than your grandmother's life, than our family. You meant that you're so entitled to something you didn't earn that you would wish death on me for it." Her chin trembled. She looked like a little girl again, a child caught in a lie. But I couldn't forget the venom in her voice, the calculation in her eyes. I had to answer her, not just for myself, but for the family, for the years of sacrifice, for the love that she had just so carelessly trampled on. I looked at her, at my daughter, and I gave her my answer. It wasn't a scream or a lecture. It was a simple, honest truth. And I knew in that moment it would be the start of a long, painful journey for all of us. I looked at my daughter, her face a mask of defiance and regret, and the silence in the room was a living thing. My wife, Sarah, had a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. David, my brother, finally spoke, his voice low and firm. "Emily, what a terrible thing to say. You need to apologize to your father, now." Emily flinched at the sharpness in his tone, but she didn't apologize. She simply turned and ran from the room, her footsteps heavy on the stairs as she retreated to the sanctuary of her bedroom. The slamming door was the final punctuation mark on a ruined Christmas. My nephews looked at me, their young faces a mix of confusion and pity. David and Lisa exchanged a look. I knew what they were thinking. What happened to your daughter, Mark? I didn't want their pity. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to understand how it had come to this. But I couldn't. Not now. I had to face the reality of the moment. I sat back down, the silence even heavier than before. "I think we should go," Lisa said softly, her voice filled with a gentle sorrow. "It's been a long day." David nodded, looking at me with a pained expression. "I'm sorry, Mark, I'll call you tomorrow." I watched them leave, the festive wreaths on the door a stark reminder of what this day was supposed to be. As the door closed, the house was plunged into a new kind of silence, one filled with the ghosts of spoken words. Sarah came over and sat next to me on the couch, her hand finding mine. Her grip was tight and reassuring. "She didn't mean it," Sarah whispered, her voice a plea for me to believe it. "She did, Sarah," I said, the words heavy in my mouth. "She meant every word. She's been stewing on this for weeks. She's seen every doctor's visit, every care plan meeting, every dollar spent on her grandmother as a personal affront." My mind reeled back to a memory from a few weeks ago. Emily had been on the phone talking to a friend. I overheard her talking about my mother's new home. "It's like a 5-star hotel for old people," she'd scoffed, "and it's costing us a fortune. There goes my down payment." I had dismissed it then as a moment of youthful frustration, a fleeting complaint. I had told myself she didn't understand the complexities of it all, but she did. She understood perfectly. She simply didn't care. The problem wasn't just the money. It was the entitlement. The idea that she was owed something, that she was owed my mother's life savings, as if it were a trust fund she was simply waiting to inherit. I'd always tried to teach her the value of hard work, the satisfaction of earning your own way. I had worked 2 jobs in my 20s to get us a house. Sarah had worked part-time as a librarian, and we had saved every penny. We had given Emily a good life, a life without the struggles we had faced. But in giving her everything, had we inadvertently taught her that she was owed everything? The question gnawed at me. My parents had been strict but fair. My father, a man of quiet integrity, had taught me the value of $1 and the dignity of a job well done. He had always said, "Mark, your life is your own. You build it yourself." I had taken his words to heart. I had worked hard, I had provided for my family, and I had been proud of the life I had built. But it seemed my own daughter saw my life not as a testament to my hard work, but as a stepping stone to her own comfort. Sarah squeezed my hand. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said honestly. I don't know if I can look at her the same way. The words, they were like a knife. The next few days were a blur of polite silence and strained interactions. Emily stayed in her room, emerging only for food, her face sullen and uncommunicative. We had an unspoken truce. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about her words, about my mother, or about the future. We just existed in the same house, 2 strangers under one roof. I decided I needed to get out of the house. I had to clear my head. I drove to the park where I used to take Emily when she was a little girl. I walked the familiar paths, the same paths where I had pushed her on a swing, taught her to ride a bike, and listened to her dreams. The memories were a bittersweet torment. I remembered her little face, bright with joy, her laughter ringing through the air, the little girl who would run to me with a scraped knee, who would throw her arms around me and tell me I was the best dad in the world. Where did that girl go? When did the love turn into a cold transactional calculation? I sat on a bench, watching a young father teach his son how to throw a baseball. The boy stumbled, the ball rolling to a stop. The father knelt, his arm around his son's shoulders, and spoke to him in a low, gentle voice. The boy's face lit up, and he tried again. That's what it was all about, I thought. The simple, unconditional love between a parent and a child. I had thought I had that with Emily. But had I? Had I mistaken her love for a reflection of my own? Or had it always been a conditional thing, a love based on what I could provide? I returned home, the quiet of the house a stark contrast to the tumult in my mind. I found Sarah in the living room, a stack of bills on the coffee table. The statement from my mother's retirement community was on top. I looked at the number, the figure a testament to the cost of love and care. It was a lot, but my mother was worth it. Her happiness, her safety, her comfort. It was all worth it. "I don't know what to do about her," Sarah said, picking up the statement. "She's been so distant. She won't talk to me." "She won't talk to anyone," I said. "She's a prisoner of her own greed, and I don't know how to set her free." The next morning I made a decision. I had to talk to her. Not as a father scolding his child, but as an adult to an adult. I had to explain my feelings, my perspective, and the truth of the situation. I had to make her understand the gravity of her words. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about family, about love. I found her in the kitchen making toast. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wary. I saw the flash of fear in them, but also a hardening resolve. "Emily," I said, "we need to talk." She didn't answer. She just looked at me, a silent challenge in her gaze. I felt a surge of frustration, but I pushed it down. This wasn't a battle. This was a conversation. "What you said on Christmas Day," I began, "it was the most hurtful thing anyone has ever said to me. You wished for my death. For money." She finally spoke, her voice flat. "I said I didn't mean it. But you did, I know you did, and I need to understand why. Why is money so important to you that you would say something like that to your own father?" She set the toast down, her hands shaking slightly. "It's not about the money, Dad. It's about a life. The life I can't have. It's about being able to breathe, to not be crushed by student loans and rent and the crushing pressure of just trying to get by. You don't understand." "I do understand," I said, my voice rising with a rare show of emotion. "I understand what it means to struggle. I've been there. I worked hard so you wouldn't have to. But I do have to," she said, her voice a scream. "I do have to struggle, because you're spending all of Grandma's money. It was supposed to be for me, for my future. You're selfishly throwing it away." The accusation, so baseless and cruel, hit me like a physical blow. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over. I looked at her, at the venom in her eyes, and I knew I couldn't get through to her. She was too far gone, too lost in her own selfishness. The little girl I had known was gone, replaced by a stranger. I had come here to talk to her, to try and bridge the chasm that had opened between us. But with her last words, she had not only widened the gap, but had thrown a match into it. The bridge was gone. The chasm was now a canyon, and there was no way to cross it. My hope, my small, fragile hope for a reconciliation, shattered into a million pieces. My voice was low and steady as I finally said the words that had been building inside me. "Emily, I want you to listen to me, and I want you to listen very carefully. I am not throwing anything away. I am spending your grandmother's money on her care, on her life. It is not yours. It was never yours. And if you think a few $1,000s is more important than the woman who raised me, who taught me what love is, who gave me the values that I tried to pass on to you, then you are not the person I thought you were. And as long as you feel that way, there is nothing left to talk about." I turned and walked away, the echo of my words hanging in the air. I had said my piece. The ball was in her court, but I had a terrible feeling she wouldn't even try to pick it up. The chasm between us was now a bottomless pit, and I had no idea how to pull her back from the edge. The days that followed my confrontation with Emily were a living nightmare. The house became a tomb. We were 3 ghosts haunting the same hallways, our silence a constant, suffocating presence. Emily had retreated into herself completely. She would leave her room for meals, but only after Sarah or I had finished. She avoided eye contact, her face a blank slate of indifference. I tried to talk to her again, to reason with her, to beg her to see the wrong in her words, but she would simply look through me, as if I were a piece of furniture, and walk away. The emotional distance was a physical barrier. I found myself escaping the house more and more. I would go to work, even on my days off, just to have a purpose that wasn't tied to the turmoil at home. I would sit in my office, the hum of the computers and the ringing of the phones, a welcome distraction. My co-workers noticed the change. I was usually an easygoing, jocular person. Now I was withdrawn, my smile a rare and strained sight. My colleague Robert, a man in his late 50s with a booming laugh and an infectious love of life, pulled me aside one day. "Mark, what's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated. I had never been one to air my family's dirty laundry, but Robert had been a friend for over 20 years. He was the kind of person who listened without judgment. I found myself telling him everything: the Christmas Day confrontation, Emily's cruel words, the chasm that had opened between us. As I spoke, the dam broke. I found myself talking about my mother, about the guilt I felt for placing her in a home, and about the fear that Emily was right, that I was selfishly squandering a legacy that was not my own. Robert listened patiently, his hand on my shoulder. When I finished, the silence was a stark contrast to the torrent of my words. "Mark," he said, his voice soft, "you're a good man. You're a good son. And you're a good father. Your daughter is lost. She's lost in a world that tells her she deserves everything without having to work for it, and she's lost sight of what's real. But what do I do, Robert?" I asked, the desperation in my voice raw. "I feel like I'm losing her. She's not the same person." "You can't force her to see the light," he said. "She has to find her own way. You just have to be there when she's ready to come home. And in the meantime, you need to live your life. You need to focus on what you can control. You are doing the right thing for your mother. You have to believe that. And you have to show Emily by your actions that some things are more important than money." His words resonated with me. I couldn't control Emily's choices, but I could control my own. I could focus on my mother, on my wife, on the things that truly mattered. I made a promise to myself to be more present, more intentional. The next day, I called my brother David. I hadn't spoken to him since Christmas. He answered on the first ring, his voice laced with concern. "Hey Mark, how are you?" "I'm surviving," I said, a little joke to lighten the mood. "Listen, I just wanted to apologize for the mess on Christmas. It wasn't fair to you and Lisa to have to witness that." "Don't be ridiculous," he said. "It wasn't your fault, we all saw it. Emily was way out of line. I'm just sorry I wasn't there to stop it sooner." We talked for a long time, not just about Emily, but about our mother. We reminisced about her strength, her humor, the way she had always put us first. We talked about her time in the retirement community, and David offered to help with the costs. I was touched by his offer, but I told him it wasn't necessary. This was my responsibility. It was my mother, and I was going to take care of her. He didn't argue. He simply said, "Well, if you ever change your mind, you know where I am." The conversation with David, my brother, the one I had always felt a silent competition with, was a welcome reminder of the ties that bound us. He wasn't just my brother, he was my friend. And in this time of isolation, that was a comfort I desperately needed. One afternoon, I decided to visit my mother. I hadn't been to see her in a few days. The guilt was a heavy weight on my shoulders. I drove to the retirement community, a beautiful, sprawling campus with manicured gardens and cheerful residents. It was a far cry from the institutional feel of most nursing homes. As I walked down the hall, I heard the faint sound of music. I found my mother in the common room, a small group of residents around her. She was sitting at a piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, a soft smile on her face. She was playing Für Elise, a song she had taught me when I was a boy. The melody was a balm to my soul. I stood in the doorway, a silent observer. My mother had always loved music. It was her escape, her joy. I remembered her sitting at the piano in our small living room, the music filling the air, a melody of love and comfort. I had forgotten that part of her, the part that was more than just a patient, more than just a financial burden. She was Clara, my mother. She was a woman who loved music and laughter, a woman who had given me everything. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes finding mine. Her smile widened. "Mark, you're here," she said, her voice filled with a genuine, unadulterated joy. She stood up and walked toward me, her arms open. I hugged her tight, a feeling of peace washing over me. This was what mattered. This, not the money, not the anger, just this moment, with my mother alive and happy and safe. We sat and talked for hours. She told me about her friends, about the activities she was enjoying, about the kind nurses who cared for her. She didn't seem to notice the apathetic silence that had become a constant in our lives. She was simply living, and in her living, I found a measure of peace. That evening, as I drove home, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't force Emily to love me. I couldn't force her to see the light. But I could live my life with integrity and grace. I could show her what it meant to be a man, a husband, a father, a son. I could show her that a life of meaning was not about what you had, but about who you were. When I got home, I found Sarah in the kitchen making tea. I wrapped my arms around her from behind and rested my chin on her shoulder. "I love you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She turned in my arms and hugged me tight. "I love you too, Mark. We'll get through this," I said, more to myself than to her. "We have to." The unspoken chasm was still there, a great divide between me and my daughter. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily shattered, but it was there. And I was going to hold on to it with everything I had. I was going to fight for my family, not with anger and resentment, but with love and patience. I was going to show Emily that the real inheritance was not in a bank account, but in the lessons of a lifetime. The lessons she had so carelessly forgotten. The quiet war in our house continued, a cold standoff between two people who once loved each other without question. Emily remained a ghost, her presence a heavy silence, her absence a constant ache. Sarah and I spoke in hushed tones, our conversations about daily life punctuated by the silent, unanswerable question, "What do we do about Emily?" I tried to fill the void with work, with visits to my mother, with long, aimless drives. But no matter where I went, the weight of Emily's words followed me. My mother's birthday was approaching. It was the first one since she had moved into the retirement community. We had always celebrated it with a big family dinner, a gathering of all the generations. This year it felt different. The thought of having a party, of asking Emily to participate, filled me with dread. I knew she would refuse. And if she came, her bitterness would poison the air, a silent but palpable resentment that would ruin the day for everyone. I talked to Sarah about it. She was torn. "She's our daughter, Mark. We can't just leave her out." "I know," I said. "But do you really think she'll come? And if she does, what will she say? What will she do?" We decided to keep the celebration small. Just me, Sarah, David, Lisa, and the boys. We would go to the retirement community and have a quiet dinner there. It was a compromise, a way to honor my mother without forcing a confrontation with Emily. I called David to tell him the plan, and he agreed. "It's for the best, Mark. We'll make it a good day for her." The day of the party, a strange feeling of dread settled in my stomach. It felt like I was betraying my daughter, like I was choosing my brother and my mother over her. I knew it wasn't true. This wasn't a choice. It was a consequence of Emily's own actions. But the guilt was still there, a small, persistent voice in my head. We arrived at the retirement community and were led to a private dining room. The room was decorated with balloons and streamers, and a beautiful cake sat on the table. My mother's face lit up when she saw us. Her joy was a powerful antidote to the guilt I had been feeling. She hugged us all, her eyes twinkling with happiness. "This is so wonderful," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "All of you, together." As we ate, we laughed and reminisced about old times. David told a story about a prank we had pulled on our father when we were kids, and my mother's laugh filled the room. For a few hours, the world outside this room, the world of silent homes and unspoken words, faded away. It was just family, a broken family, but a family nonetheless. My mother looked at me, a soft smile on her face. "You know, Mark," she said, "your father would have been so proud of you. The way you've handled all of this. He would have been proud." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt a lump form in my throat, a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. My father had always been a quiet, reserved man. His approval was a rare and precious thing. He had died 10 years ago, and in all that time I had never stopped craving his approval, his validation. To hear my mother say, "He would have been proud," it was everything. It was a confirmation that I was on the right path, that my choices, difficult as they were the right ones. As we were getting ready to leave, my mother took my hand. "Thank you, Mark," she said, her voice low, "for everything." I knelt and hugged her, a silent promise in my heart to always be there for her. As I walked out, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I was doing the right thing. I was a good son. And that was enough. When we got home, the house was dark and silent. Emily's car was in the driveway. She was home. The peace I had felt just moments before was replaced by a familiar sense of dread. Sarah and I walked in, our footsteps echoing in the silence. I found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Emily. "Dad, I know you went to Grandma's, I know you had a party, and you didn't invite me. I guess I'm not family anymore. I guess the money is more important than me." Emily. The note was a punch to the gut. The guilt, which I had so recently fought off, came back with a vengeance. She had twisted the situation, warped it in her own mind until she was the victim, and I was the villain. The note was a testament to her inability to take responsibility for her own actions. She had made a choice. She had pushed us away, and now she was blaming me for the distance. I felt a surge of anger. I crumpled the note in my hand. I wanted to scream, to yell at her that this was her fault, that she was the one who had driven a wedge between us. But I didn't. I just stood there, the crumpled note in my hand, the weight of her words, a physical burden on my chest. Sarah came and stood beside me, her arms wrapped around my waist. She had read the note. She didn't say anything, she just held me. I felt the familiar sense of hopelessness. How do you fight with someone who refuses to see the truth? How do you reason with someone who believes her own lies? I knew I couldn't let this go. I had to face her. I had to make her understand that she was the one who had broken the family, not me. I walked up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The familiar dread was back, but this time it was mixed with a newfound resolve. I was done with the silence. I was done with the games. I was going to confront her, and this time I wasn't going to back down. I knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "Emily, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you." Her voice was muffled from behind the door. "Well, I have something to say to you," I said, my voice firm, "and I'm not going anywhere until you open this door." The door finally creaked open. Emily stood there, her face tear-stained, her eyes red and puffy. She looked at me with a mix of defiance and hurt. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. "I want you to explain this," I said, holding up the crumpled note. "I want you to tell me why you think I didn't invite you to your grandmother's birthday." She looked away, a fresh wave of tears rolling down her cheeks. "Because you're angry at me," she said. "Because I said what I said." "I am angry at you, Emily," I said, my voice low. "But not for that. I'm angry at you for this, for blaming me for the consequences of your own actions. You pushed us away, Emily. You broke our family. Not me, not your mother, you." She looked at me, her face a mixture of shock and pain. The truth, finally spoken, was a cold slap in the face. She had no answer. She just stood there, the reality of her choices finally dawning on her. The silence stretched between us, a long, agonizing moment of truth. I looked at her, at my daughter, and I felt a wave of sadness. I had always tried to protect her, to shelter her from the hard truths of life. But in doing so, I had done her a disservice. I had created a woman who couldn't handle adversity, a woman who blamed others for her own failures. I took a step back. I had said my piece. The ball was in her court. The weight of her name, the name I had given her, felt heavier than ever, and I knew in that moment that the only way forward was to let go. I had to let her fall. I had to let her face the consequences of her choices, no matter how painful it was for me to watch. It was the only way she would ever learn. The confrontation with Emily had changed something. The silence in the house wasn't just a heavy blanket anymore. It was charged with a new kind of tension, a silent acknowledgement that the unsaid had been said. Emily still kept to herself, but her apathetic indifference was replaced by a simmering anger. She would slam doors, leave her dishes in the sink, and walk past me with a pointed lack of acknowledgement. The quiet war had become an active one, a cold but undeniable conflict. I decided to double down on my strategy, focus on what I could control. I spent more time with my mother, bringing her books she loved, talking with her about her memories, and just sitting with her in comfortable silence. I found a certain solace in her presence. She was living in a world of her own, one of fading memories and simple joys. She didn't carry the weight of the past or the anxiety of the future. She simply existed in the present, a lesson I was trying desperately to learn. I also found a new project for myself. I had always been good with my hands. When I was a kid, my father and I had restored a vintage car together. It had been his pride and joy, a testament to his patience and skill. I had a similar car, a beautiful old Mustang sitting in the garage, a project I had always meant to get to. It was a dusty, forgotten thing, a symbol of a dream I had put on the back burner. Now, it felt like the right time to pick up that dream again. I spent my evenings in the garage, the smell of oil and old leather a welcome change from the stale air in the house. I would put on my work gloves, open the hood, and lose myself in the intricate world of the engine. The work was methodical and demanding, a welcome distraction for my racing mind. There was a sense of accomplishment in every rusty bolt I loosened, every new part I installed. The car was broken, but I knew I could fix it. The sense of control I felt in that garage was a powerful antidote to the helplessness I felt in my own home. One evening, as I was under the car, I heard the garage door open. It was Emily. She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching me. I didn't say anything, I just kept working. The silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice flat. "Fixing the car," I said, my voice muffled from under the hood. "Why?" "Because it's broken, and I can fix it." "You could sell it and get a new one," she said. "It's a lot of work." I stopped what I was doing and slid out from under the car. I stood up, wiping the oil from my hands with a rag. I looked at her, at the familiar hardness in her eyes. "Some things are worth fixing, Emily, even if it's a lot of work." She didn't say anything. She just looked at the car, then at me. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the calculation. How much was the car worth? How much would it cost to fix it? What was the financial value of this project? "It's a beautiful car," she finally said, her voice surprisingly soft. "Grandpa's car?" "No," I said. "This is mine, but it reminds me of his. We worked on his together. We fixed it up a little at a time. It took us years, but it was worth it, every minute of it." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a memory, perhaps. Her glimpse of a time when the world was simpler, when love was not measured in dollars and cents. She had been a little girl then, a tiny shadow in the garage, watching her father and grandfather work together, their laughter echoing in the small space. She left as abruptly as she had come, but her visit had been a small crack in the wall she had built between us. I knew it wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a start. A small, fragile hope that somewhere, buried beneath the resentment and the entitlement, was the little girl who loved her father. The next day I found her in the kitchen, a notebook open on the counter. She was meticulously writing something down, her brow furrowed in concentration. I walked over and looked over her shoulder. It was a budget, a detailed, color-coded spreadsheet of her expenses. Rent, student loans, food, gas. Every dollar was accounted for. And at the bottom of the page, a large, bold number, a deficit. She was in the red. "What is this?" I asked, my voice soft. She looked up, her face a mixture of shame and frustration. "It's my life, Dad. It's a spreadsheet of my life, and I can't make the numbers work. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would just say I should get a new job, or that I should work harder. You don't understand." "Emily, I told you I'd help you with your student loans," I said, a wave of sadness washing over me. "I've always told you that. All you have to do is ask." "I don't want your help," she said, her voice filled with a desperate pride. "I want to do it on my own. I want to buy a house. I want to have a family. And I can't do any of that with this." She gestured to the spreadsheet with a shaky hand. "I'm just treading water, Dad. And every day I feel like I'm drowning." The raw emotion in her voice was a revelation. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her dreams, her fear, her overwhelming sense of hopelessness. The inheritance, the money from my mother, was a lifeline she was desperately clinging to, a solution to a problem that felt insurmountable. I looked at the spreadsheet, at the cold, hard numbers that were crushing her spirit, and I finally understood. She wasn't a greedy, selfish person. She was a scared one. She was a young woman in a world that felt too big, too expensive, too impossible. "Emily," I said, my voice full of compassion, "I get it. I really do. But wishing for your grandmother's death, for her money, that's not a solution. That's a sickness, and it's not going to get you a house. It's not going to get you a family. It's only going to get you a life filled with bitterness and regret." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I just don't know what to do." The dam broke. The tears which had been building for months finally came. She sobbed, a deep, racking sound that came from a place of genuine pain. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, my daughter walked into them. I held her, her body shaking with grief, and I knew in that moment that we had finally reached a turning point. The wall was down. The silence was broken. And the long, difficult road to reconciliation had finally begun. The days after Emily's breakdown were a delicate and fragile period. The open conflict was gone, replaced by a tentative peace. She was still withdrawn, but the hostility had been replaced by a quiet vulnerability. She would sometimes come into the garage, not to challenge me, but just to sit and watch me work. She would ask questions about the car, about the engine, about my father's old Mustang. I answered her patiently, the conversations a slow, careful dance of reconnection. One evening, as I was tightening a bolt on the engine, she asked, "Did Grandpa ever get frustrated with the car?" "Oh, all the time," I said, a small smile on my face. "He once threw a wrench across the garage, almost hit me in the head. He was so mad he almost gave up. But he didn't. He came back the next day, and he worked on it until he figured it out." Why didn't he just give up? I thought about the question. It was a good one, a question I had asked myself 1,000,000 times in the past few months. Because it was more than just a car to him, I said. It was a promise to himself that he could finish what he started. It was a testament to his patience, his persistence. It was a legacy. He wanted to show me that some things are worth the fight. Emily was silent for a long time. The only sound in the garage was the gentle clinking of my tools. Finally she spoke, her voice a low whisper. "I'm sorry, Dad, about what I said. I was so angry, so scared. I didn't know what to do. And I took it out on you." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. Her face was a portrait of sincere regret. The words I had been so desperate to hear were finally here, and in that moment the pain, the anger, the frustration of the past few months, all of it just seemed to melt away. "I know, honey," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know you were scared. We all are. This is a tough world to navigate. But you never have to be alone. You have me, you have your mother, you have your family." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know, I felt so alone, so lost." "I know," I said. "I know." The apology was a first step, a fragile beginning, but it was a start. The next day, I had an idea. I decided to take Emily to see her grandmother, not as a forced obligation, but as an invitation, a chance for her to see the reality of her grandmother's life and to see the person beyond the financial burden she had become in her mind. I called her. "Emily, I'm going to see Grandma. Would you like to come with me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I held my breath, waiting for her answer. I knew she could say no, she could say she was busy, she could make an excuse. But she didn't. "Yeah, Dad," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I'd like that." The drive to the retirement community was quiet, but not uncomfortable. We talked about small things, about her job, about my work, about the weather. We were like two strangers on a road trip, carefully navigating the turns, trying to find our way back to each other. When we arrived, we found my mother in the common room, a puzzle on the table in front of her. She looked up as we entered, her face lighting up with a beautiful, genuine smile. "Emily," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Oh, my sweet girl, it's so good to see you." Emily flinched, a small involuntary reaction. I could see the shame on her face. She hugged her grandmother, a tense, awkward embrace. My mother, oblivious to the emotional storm, just held her tight. We sat down, and my mother started talking about the puzzle, about the missing piece she couldn't find. She looked so happy, so at peace. She talked about the nurses, about her friends, about the daily activities she was enjoying. She didn't complain. She didn't seem to miss her old life. She was simply living. At one point, my mother looked at Emily, a gentle smile on her face. "You know, Emily," she said, "you're so much like your grandfather. He was so stubborn. He always wanted to do things his own way, but he had a good heart, a good, kind heart." Emily's eyes filled with tears. I knew what my mother was doing. She wasn't just talking about my father, she was talking to Emily. She was telling her that she saw the good in her, the kindness beneath the bitterness, and she was giving her a gentle, loving permission to let go of her anger and find her way back. As we were getting ready to leave, my mother took Emily's hand. "You know, I have something for you," she said. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, old-fashioned watch. It was a men's watch, a beautiful antique timepiece. "It was your grandfather's," she said. "He wore it every day. He said it reminded him that time was a precious thing. He wanted you to have it." Emily took the watch, her hands trembling. She held it in her palm, her eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, honey," my mother said. "Just know that it's yours. Just know that I love you." We said our goodbyes and left. In the car, Emily was silent. She held the watch in her hand, turning it over and over. "The crystal is broken," she said, her voice a whisper. "It doesn't work." I looked at her, at the raw emotion on her face. "Some things just can't be fixed, Emily, but you can learn from them. You can use the broken pieces to build something new. You can find a different way to live, a way that doesn't involve wishing for someone else's death." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know, Dad. I'm trying. I really am." The watch, the broken timepiece, was a powerful symbol. It was a reminder that the past was just that, the past. The hands couldn't turn back, but the future was not written. It was a blank page, waiting for her to write her own story, a story of healing, of forgiveness, of a life built on a foundation of love, not on the broken pieces of a failed dream. The road to reconciliation was long, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed we were on our way. The broken watch became Emily's constant companion. She wore it every day, a silent, powerful reminder of her grandfather's legacy and her grandmother's love. It was a physical representation of the aha moment she'd experienced, a realization that time was indeed precious, and that some things were more important than a number in a bank account. Our house, once a silent tomb, began to feel like a home again. The tense quiet was replaced by the low hum of conversation. We would talk about our days, about the little things that make up a life. We hadn't talked about the past, about the hurtful words or the cold silence, but it was there, a shadow in the background, a silent reminder of how far we had come. The change in Emily was slow but steady. She started to put in more effort at her job. She took on extra shifts. She pitched new ideas to her boss. She started taking online courses to improve her skills. Her dream of a house and a family hadn't disappeared, but the desperation had. It had been replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. She was no longer waiting for a miracle, she was working for one. One evening I found her in the garage, her head under the hood of the Mustang. I was surprised to see her there. She looked up, her face smudged with grease. "What are you doing?" I asked, a smile on my face. "I'm looking for the broken piece," she said. "The one that's stopping it from running. I've been watching videos online. I think I know what it is." I was stunned. I looked at the old car, at my hands, at my daughter, her face set in a look of fierce determination. This wasn't about the car. It was about her. It was about finding the broken piece in herself and trying to fix it. "You're a natural," I said, my voice filled with pride. "Your grandfather would have loved this." "He would have called me stubborn," she said, a small smile on her lips, "and he would have told me to keep going." The conversation was a turning point. We started to work on the car together. She would read the manual and I would point out the parts. She would hold the flashlight and I would explain the inner workings of the engine. It was a new kind of language, a way for us to connect without the weight of our past. She was a fast learner. She had a keen mind and an almost intuitive understanding of mechanics. I found myself looking forward to our evenings in the garage. The rhythmic sound of the tools, the smell of oil and metal, the shared purpose. It was a different kind of bond, but it was a bond nonetheless. One night, as we were working on the carburetor, Emily suddenly said, "Dad, I have to ask you something." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. Her face was serious. "What is it, honey?" "Did you ever think about selling the car?" she asked. "To pay for Grandma's care?" The question hung in the air between us. It was a direct question, a test, a way for her to finally confront the spectre that had haunted us all. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said. "I did." The thought crossed my mind, more than once. "Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't just a car," I said. "It was a legacy. It was a memory. It was something my father and I built together. It was a testament to our bond, and no amount of money could ever replace that. The cost of your grandmother's care, that's just a number. But the value of a family, of a shared history, of a father and son working together, that's priceless." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of understanding. She had been so focused on the cost of things, on the dollars and cents. She had lost sight of the value of things. She had been so consumed by the idea of building her own life that she had forgotten to live the one she had. "I get it," she said, her voice a whisper. "I finally get it." The words were a balm to my soul. She wasn't just saying she was sorry. She was saying she understood. She was saying she had found her way back. Our family, which had been so fractured, began to slowly heal. David and Lisa would come over for dinner, and Emily would talk to them, her quiet reserve replaced by a newfound openness. She would talk about her job, about her dreams, about the car we were restoring. She was still a work in progress, but the angry, entitled girl was gone. In her place was a young woman, with a new sense of purpose, a new kind of understanding. The final piece of the puzzle came together one afternoon. I received a phone call from my mother's retirement community. Her health had taken a turn for the worse. I felt a wave of cold dread. I called Sarah and Emily, and we all rushed to the facility. We found her in her room, a nurse by her side. She was frail, her breathing shallow. She looked at us, her eyes filled with a beautiful, knowing peace. We stayed with her, talking to her, telling her stories, holding her hand. Emily was there, a silent presence by her side. She held her grandmother's hand, her thumb rubbing against the broken watch she wore on her wrist. In that moment, I saw the full arc of our journey, from a place of greed and selfishness to a place of love and care. My daughter had come full circle. She was no longer a child who wished for her grandmother's death. She was a woman who was there for her, in her final moments. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with a love so deep it was almost painful. She looked at Sarah, then at Emily. She smiled, a soft, beautiful smile. Her last words were a whisper, a promise, a blessing. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." And then she was gone. The grief was a heavy blanket, a suffocating weight. But in the midst of the sorrow, there was a sense of peace. We had been there. We had been a family. And in the final moments of her life, my mother had known how much she was loved. As we stood outside, the cold air a shock to my lungs, Emily wrapped her arms around me. She held me tight, her head on my chest. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she said, her voice a sob. "I'm so sorry for all of it." "She knows, honey," I said, my own voice breaking. "She knows you love her. She always did." The next few weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements, of grieving, of remembering. The will was read, and my mother's money was left to a trust, to be used for the care of her grandchildren's education. A small portion was left to me and David, and a final personal gift was left to Emily. My mother's favorite piano, the one she had played for us so many times. It was a final, beautiful act of love. She had known my daughter's heart, and she had given her a gift that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The funeral was a sad affair, but it was also a celebration of a life well lived. Emily stood next to me, her arm linked with mine. She read a poem, a beautiful tribute to a woman who had taught her, in her last days, what it meant to truly live. As she read, her voice strong and clear, I knew that the seeds of a new life had been sown, a life of purpose, a life of love, a life of healing. My daughter had finally found her way home. The broken watch was a beautiful reminder of the journey. The real inheritance was not the money, but the love that had been there all along. After the funeral, a quiet sense of remembrance settled over our family. The void left by my mother was slowly filled by a shared sorrow. Her will was a final act of wisdom, leaving the bulk of her estate in a trust for her grandchildren's education. Her antique piano was a personal gift to Emily. Emily was amazed when the piano arrived, confessing she didn't know how to play. I suggested we learn together, and we found my mother's old songbook. Our clumsy efforts to play filled the house with a melody of love and healing. One evening, Emily asked why my mother hadn't left me the money. I explained it was never about payment, but about love and responsibility, a gift I gave freely. Emily understood that some acts are priceless. Our work on the car also progressed. The old Mustang was becoming a new symbol of our relationship. As we worked, Emily asked if I thought we'd ever get it to run. I told her the effort was what mattered. She smiled, noting it was something Grandpa would have said. The car, like our family, was being brought back to life. Months later, the car was finished. A quiet pride filled us as the engine roared to life. The final act of our story wasn't a dramatic event, but a simple moment. Emily told me she was going back to school to become a mechanical engineer. She wanted to build a life she had earned, not inherited. My mother's final lesson had come to fruition. Months turned into a year. The Mustang symbolized our rebuilt relationship, a testament to our shared journey. Emily's new life as a college student and part-time mechanic was a source of immense pride. The bitter, entitled girl was gone, replaced by a confident young woman building her own life, one paycheck and one project at a time. Then one evening, Emily came to me, a nervous look on her face. "Dad," she said, "I need to talk to you about the inheritance." My heart sank, but I braced myself. She declared that she didn't want the money. She wanted to earn her new life, not start with a handout. Instead, she wanted to donate it to a scholarship fund for students entering a trade like mechanics or engineering. I was overcome with emotion. She had learned the lesson her grandmother had so carefully taught her. I hugged her, telling her how proud her grandmother would be. We set up the new foundation, turning the money from a source of conflict into one of hope. My mother's legacy wasn't just a memory, it was a living, breathing thing.